Okay, this is Brian Horner on April 10th, 2015 at the Estes Park Museum, interviewing Estes Park Town Administrator Frank Lancaster about his experience during the flood of 2013. Can we start with you telling us your full name and occupation, please?
Sure. I'm Frank Lancaster. I'm the Town Administrator for the Town of Estes Park.
When did you first realize something catastrophic was going on?
I knew the water was coming up even the day before, but I thought it was just coming up a little bit. In fact, I feel kind of bad about it. I do kayaking and rafting and love kayaking the river through town. And the day before, on Tuesday, we were down there saying, "Oh, it's up again. We'll have to come down here this weekend and run the river." Then we were having dinner with some friends in Lyons, and coming up, the water seemed pretty high, and it seemed to keep raining. But still didn't think much of it. It was just a fall rainstorm. But then I got a call about 3 o'clock in the morning from the police department saying, "Okay, things are not good. I think you better come down here." And that's when I knew we were in trouble. I've had calls like that before in the middle of the night when they say, "Get up and come down to town hall to open up the emergency operations center." I knew things were not looking good.
Was that Wednesday morning or Thursday morning?
It would have been Wednesday morning, I think. Early Wednesday morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning.
What are your recollections of the week leading up to that day?
You know, it had been raining for quite a bit, although I think the weekend before was pretty nice. Went to the Longs Peak Highland Festival, which is a good thing that was done before the flood happened. And it was a little rainy and it kept coming, but it wasn't anything that unusual until that night before when it started really coming down that evening. It was fairly normal. Ironically, Lowell Richardson, who was the assistant town administrator, had decided to move on. And his last day at the town was on Wednesday, the day before the flood. So the flood hit, and we were short-staffed in the admin office at the same time. I don't know how he timed it that way, but he worked it out to miss the biggest disaster we've had probably ever.
After you got the phone call, and I'm assuming you go down to town hall then, and you realize this is serious, what was kind of the first thoughts that you had and kind of the first steps you took once you got there and getting the emergency operating system up and going?
Well, the first thing is staff's there. We've got our public information officer there. We've got the police and the commander, police chief, and we just start debriefing and talking, and public works, talking about what we're seeing. We try and assess the situation because it's always a little chaotic at the beginning of an incident, and try and figure out, is this going to get worse? Is this the bad as it's going to be? Because I've seen them before where you do that, you get all ready to go, and then 2 hours later the sun comes out, the water goes down, and everything's fine. So we're kind of playing it by ear and seeing what goes on. Had people out in the field, both police officers and public works people on the radio, going around different parts of town and checking on water levels, seeing where it's coming out of the bank, and trying to get a picture where we're at so we can decide what to do. It's probably about an hour after that we decided, okay, this is going to be a big one. This is a problem. We still didn't know what was going on in the canyons at that point, I don't think. And we decided we need to activate the EOC. We called in all the key players in the town. I notified the mayor and the town board that we were probably heading into a disaster, and we started activating and starting to organize the EOC and get phone banks up to answer phone calls. We're starting to get phone calls from people, getting people stationed to monitor what's going on, see where we need to do evacuation. At that point, we were coordinating with the sheriff's office and other entities, the fire department, to start the immediate response during the disaster. And that was probably what we did until about 7 or 8 in the morning when we had our first, I think about then as our first command center meeting to really start regrouping and seeing where we're going to go with the whole disaster.
So what were your responsibilities during the event? Once the Emergency Operations Center got up and going, what were you responsible for?
My job is kind of coordinate resources. We have great people, know how to run the EOC. We have an incident commander from the police department. I help get him resources. We met on a daily basis with the senior management team, our department heads. They all took on different roles. We assigned them different chair roles in the incident command system. So, for example, Bo Winslow, who's our fairgrounds and community services director, he was our logistics commander. So he just took charge of getting logistics. So we had people doing different things outside of their comfort zone, but as a team, it was used to working together, and many of them had training, which paid off in the long run. In fact, even before I came to the town, when I worked for the county, I'd been to some emergency management training with FEMA with folks from Estes Park. So some of us had worked together before, and that really paid off because we knew how to do an incident command system. We knew how to run an EOC. We got volunteers in to run the phones because that's a big part. Information is so critical when the public is nervous and scared, and they want to know what's going on. So my role was that, also to liaise between other different organizations when we had problems between the county, federal agencies, certainly with the elected officials and with the federal officials, keeping the elected officials informed, having them go where they need to be. And then a lot of it, I was just out on the street. I had on my irrigation boots, wading downtown, talking to people, finding out what the problem is, telling them the town was there and we're working on things, and reassuring them that we were trying to work as fast as we could, giving them as much information as we can. The other thing we did we learned in some of the previous fires is Estes Park's unique in that a lot of people who own property don't live here. So we did daily town meetings every morning, and we had a packed house of people coming in because people were just hungry for information. And those were very, very well received. We would have reports from our public works, from the fire department, from utilities. But one of the things we did is we also broadcast them live on the internet, which was interesting because I've never done that. We started with one of the earlier fires, but that's something we couldn't have done 20 years ago. And we allowed call-in questions or email questions. And we had just a huge spike in the number of people watching. We had almost 2,000 people around the country watching these meetings online. And we'd get questions emailed back in. So folks that had, say, a house somewhere in town and they lived in Los Angeles or they lived in El Paso, they could call in because they weren't hearing things on the national news, just there was flooding in Estes Park. And they could ask, what's going on in my neighborhood, or are the utilities out? Is it safe? Is my house still there? And we got great feedback that was a good way to reach out to people and use technology. One of the scary things about the flood was it took out almost all lines of communication. Of course, it destroyed all the roads coming into town except Trail Ridge Road. So it was very difficult to get supplies into town. It destroyed the only fiber line coming in, the commercial fiber coming into town. The town still had one fiber line going out, but all the telephone lines were down. The cell service was out. The only communication we had at all was the internet. And people who did have internet connections could get out. People couldn't call. Our 911 center went down, which that in itself was scary. We didn't know just the normal things that happened, not just with a flood, but if somebody had a heart attack, and we were deathly afraid that we'd find them 2 or 3 days later because they called in and couldn't get help. Luckily, none of that happened. We were isolated. Then we started getting people panicking a little bit. There was a run on the grocery store. We had plenty of food. We knew everything was going to get fixed. We were working to allow food to come in over Trail Ridge Road. That was one of the things we worked on with Safeway because normally Trail Ridge doesn't allow commercial traffic. And then the truckers were afraid to take the big trucks over Trail Ridge, so they didn't want to bring food in. But we convinced them to come in with other types of vehicles, smaller ones. We got with the national park to waive the restriction on commercial traffic. But there was a run on the grocery store. I know of at least one fist fight at the gas station. There was a run on gas, which I thought was kind of ironic because you couldn't go anywhere. So people are fighting to get gas, but there's nowhere to drive. And we had a lot of visitors in town too, at the YMCA and other places that we had to find a way to get out of town. And with Trail Ridge being the only way in and out of town, it was very difficult. It was a very surreal feel. I've gone through a lot of disasters in my tenure, but never felt that isolated when people could not get to you and you couldn't communicate out.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned. There was a lot of town staff working outside of their comfort zones. Were there some specific things that you had to do that was outside of your normal comfort zone?
You know, I'm used to doing a lot of different things, and I've worked in a lot of disasters, so I don't know. So I think standing up in those meetings and all the subjects, and nothing was taboo. We just basically had to calm people down, let them know, we're working on it. I think they worked pretty well. But we had a few incidents where people went over the edge and and lost it at the meetings. And of course we had to deal with that because people were in a lot of stress, a lot of fear. So there were a few situations like that. I don't know if it's out of the comfort zone, but it's something I never thought I'd do. One of the things that happened is that we lost a major sewer line, of course, and about 2,500 homes lost their sewer service, and for several months. And so we had to have a no flush zone. We were able to take the gray water, which is water coming from your sink and showers, and they allowed that to go down because that would just dump into the river. But we didn't want people using their toilets. And so we set up this no flush zone, and obviously you still need to use those things. So we had quite the discussions about your alternatives. And my background, I spent some time as a professional river guide and working in the backcountry. In the backcountry, you deal with portable toilets and how to put that together. So I remember one meeting where I actually brought in my rafting toilet, a couple different samples, and kind of gave this presentation on porta potties, and in rafting we call them groovers, and how people could set one up because they couldn't order anything. You couldn't get anything in here. Later on we could, and we brought in porta pots from all over as far as Arizona to staff these neighborhoods. But in the meantime, I kind of gave a lesson on television of how to use a 5-gallon bucket as a toilet in your home. And it got a little humorous at times. And actually, people said they appreciated that, to be able to, in disaster, look at the kind of funny side of this. But that was something I never thought I'd be doing, is standing on the internet broadcasting how to build yourself a toilet on a Monday morning.
You mentioned being able to find the humor in that situation with portable toilets and whatnot. I went back and watched a lot of the video of those public meetings, and humor is something that I always talk to people about when I'm describing you as our town administrator, because it seems like that's something that you do consistently and were able to do very well during that event. Is that something that you consciously made an effort to do, or is that sort of also your own personal way of handling such a stressful situation?
I don't know. I think it's probably somewhat of my character. I enjoy sometimes you do have to look at the irony in things, and you have to be careful about it because it's serious, and it's not being irreverent, or maybe it is being a little irreverent, but you have to be careful and walk that fine line. But humor is a great way to put things in perspective, to understand things are going to be okay, and that there is some irony here, as long as it's used appropriately, and that you're not dismissing the disaster that's there. For example, I remember one time we were talking about damage of the golf course, and we lost one of the holes, and the damage to some homes near there, and lost part of the trail. And people were asking about that, and I said, well, actually, there's some good news here. We were named that summer as one of the most beautiful 18-hole golf courses in the United States, which is something we're very proud of. And I mentioned, well, now we are the most beautiful 17-hole golf course in the United States. And people chuckled, and it was a silly thing to say, but it just kind of relieved the tension. Humor is a great way to relieve the tension as long as it's done appropriately. And I think it was appreciated, probably for myself too. It relieves the tension. You can get way too serious about this stuff, and I think in a situation like that, the demeanor of the leaders gets reflected in the demeanor of the community. And if you see panic in the people standing up front, and you see desperation in the people who are trying to lead the disaster, that desperation and panic moves to the community. If you see calm, reserve, purpose, and dedication, but it seems like that the leaders are in control, and that things are progressing as well as they can. It is a disaster. I think it helps the whole community calm down. And I think the whole community has some of that and picked up on it. I loved when we had all the outhouses out there, the porta potties, and the neighbors on their own organized a porta potty decorating contest. They could have been very depressed about the whole thing and angry, and here you are, it's cold. Later on, it's November, you're having to walk down the cul-de-sac to use a porta potty in the middle of the night. And instead, they decorated them up like phone booths and elk and all sorts of things, and they had a contest. So that kind of thing lowers the stress of the whole community, and I think it helps everybody respond better, and it makes people more effective. If you're not stressed out as much, you can respond better, both in your personal lives and professionally, in helping people as well. So I think it's a great tool.
What was your daily routine like during that week or so of the flood?
Well, for one thing, there was no routine. There's no routine when you're doing a flood. I think I was probably working 16 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there wasn't, if there's any kind of routine, we'd start out in the morning with our response team meeting. I think we always started those at 7 o'clock. We'd meet. We'd talk about what the needs are, each different area, whether it was logistics, response, utilities, transportation, health and safety. And it wasn't just town people. The fire chief was there. There were other folks there as well. And we identified where the needs are, where the holes were, and where the breakdowns were, and put out a contingency plan, basically an attack plan of what we were going to do that day in each area. We then would break and go to the public meeting, sit in front of the public, and tell them what we're working on, what the issues were, what are the things that we're trying to address, and then address any questions they had. From that point on, it was kind of, what I would do is move around to different areas and see what they needed. I'd spend time in the JIC, the Joint Information Center. That's where they were answering the questions on the phone. Talk to the volunteers. I would go out to the evacuation centers. Sometimes we'd have formal meetings. Otherwise, we'd just meet with people and talk with them, see what they were doing. Go out and talk to some of the crews. A lot of liaison with the elected officials. Later on, we were doing a lot when we did have communication with the state and the people who were responding and trying to help us from outside. So working with them. There was a lot of press work because we got a lot of national press attention. And so we tried to talk with the press, mostly our PIO, myself, and the mayor. Keep them out of the way of the people who were trying to do the response, but also they'd get the information out that they needed. And so spent a lot of time, amazingly, with CNN, all the major networks. Remember one Sunday morning, did a live interview, a Skype interview from my living room with PBS, oh no, the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel did a story on that, so that was a little strange to be sitting in my living room in front of my iPad and knowing I was on national TV talking about things. The folks from CNN were great. They were actually one of the nicest ones that surprised me. We did a tour, took them down a lot of areas, got them into some places they could get some good shots. Even Al Jazeera was here and did some extensive interviews. I know Kate was on the BBC interviews and on the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting. So just about anybody was here in town, and we did some interviews when they could get there. And that took a lot of time too, all that press contact and getting the right information out. The other thing is we moved on, it was a balance. People were interested in this, but we're a destination community, and we didn't want people to think that we were completely destroyed. And on the press, they want to show the worst pictures possible. So the few houses that were completely destroyed show up over and over again. The recovery was amazing. Once the water went down and we got into town and started cleaning up the mud and getting businesses open, and even I think 2 weeks later, we went ahead and had Elk Fest. And many of the businesses were open. It was much smaller because it was hard to get here. But it showed the resiliency and the strength of this community because we were back very quickly. And the people who saw that and saw the pictures, how quickly this community turned around and came back was amazing. And we had to tell that story because that's the lifeblood. And we had to get out and tell people, hey, come on up, it's okay. But it was a balance too, which was very difficult because we'd say that. And then there were other people who had lost their homes, couldn't get to their homes, couldn't get there. And they were hurt that we would say, hey, we're back, things are going okay. And they'd say, no, it's not. I've lost my home. I've lost everything I own, and you're out there saying everything's fine. So it was a tough time because you've got a lot of businesses and people wanting to downplay it, and then other people are having a real hard time and had lost everything they had, and they didn't like hearing that. So it was an emotional roller coaster for everybody.
So, along this emotional roller coaster ride, was there a particular low point for you personally, or maybe in the community you felt during that week of when it was still raining and things were sort of still, I guess the water was kind of as high as it was going to get?
You know, it's hard to say there was a particular low point. There were different times. I would get frustrated with the bureaucracy. I mean, we did a lot of creative things, and then there was some fighting with some of the volunteer emergency agencies from out of town about we didn't have the right beds to put in our emergency shelter, so they weren't going to open it, and those kind of things just drove me nuts. Here, people need a place to sleep. They really didn't care if they had a standard cot or not, but we couldn't get them. That was probably a low point. There was some frustration with some of the agencies of not being cooperative, getting things done. You know, we're in the middle of emergency and they're talking about, well, I'm not sure if we can let you damage the sidewalk, which was just ridiculous type of stuff. I'm not very tolerant of those, so a lot of times we just went over their heads and got things taken care of. I don't know. You know, one of the things too that's a real balance as a town administrator is I had to realize a lot of our employees were also victims. So a lot of support for the town employees who are working on this because a lot of them had damaged homes, issues with their families, schools were closed, they had no place to take care of their kids. So we had to be very sensitive to that as well and be supportive of people. And that was something that's sometimes forgotten about, that the emergency responders in a community are often also the victims in the community because their homes are damaged or they might have had some problems. And we had some folks in our utilities that were working 18 hours a day or more, yet their homes, they couldn't even get to their homes. We had people that had to walk in miles to get here to help with their response, and they didn't know what was going on with their homes. And it's amazing the sacrifices those people made for their jobs and for their community because they cared, at the detriment of their own personal families.
Was your home affected?
You know, a little bit. I kind of live up on top of a hill, and I did have some flooding. And luckily, I had, in fact, the week before, my son had taken he was taking a semester off of college to come work here at Poppy's at one of the restaurants to earn some money. And he'd worked there for 4 days, and the flood hit, and the restaurant was wiped out. But pretty much it was nice having him around to take care of the flooding in the basement. We had some minor flooding. Plus, we had some friends that were evacuated off of Fall River, and I think this happened all over the town. And we let them move in with us because they were evacuated out of their home. And luckily, between my son and them, and they were working hard to help our house, sandbag, get the water out of my basement. I just didn't have to worry about it, which was nice. I could run home. They said, this is what's going on. And I ran back, put on a clean shirt and go back to work. Because my wife also was volunteering. She was coordinating the volunteer clearinghouse. So neither one of us were around home. We were all working long hours, both of us. And frankly, couldn't pay much attention to our own home. And it was nice to have people there to help us out. And I think that happened all over town where people, the shelters weren't that full because other people took neighbors in and friends and made sure that they were taken care of.
Was there a particular moment or something that happened during the flood that really kind of boosted your spirits or gave you the jolt that you needed to keep doing what you had to do?
I don't think there was one, but there just, every day something would come up. You'd be working really hard, and honestly, more than anything else, was the people would just come up and say thank you. That they would, in the middle of a disaster, take the time, that they appreciated what you were doing. Or talking to a staff person who was real stressed out, getting them calmed down, get them to smile a little bit. It's the little things like that made more of a difference. You'd be on the street talking to a business in town. Those kind of thank yous. People would come down to town and give us cookies. They gave us a lot of cookies. I gained weight. It's not a particularly healthy environment because we're working so many hours and you don't have much time to eat. And people were very generous. They knew we were working hard, and so they would come down and bring cookies and donuts, and they brought carrots, but I don't think I ever ate those. But there was always stuff to munch on, and we even joked about it, called it flood fat. A lot of us had the same experience because you just didn't pay attention, and frankly, you didn't have time to eat meals. So I think there were times I probably didn't have a square meal all day, but I did grab Oreos and a couple candy bars 3 or 4 times or more, because people were very helpful and supportive.
Can you talk a little bit about the flooding that happened in Town Hall, in the municipal building downtown?
Yeah, that was pretty frustrating. We were dealing with, here we are trying to open our emergency operations center. We moved it up on top on the 2nd floor. And at the same time, we had sandbag. We had Black Canyon was flooding from the back. The Big Thompson and Fall River were starting to flood us from the front, coming in from Elkhorn. And the basement was flooding. So we had a lot of sandbags up. We had great assistance from the National Park Service, came down and helped sandbag the police department and the library. But at one point, we were up there, we were having problems with the utilities, lights. I hear sirens coming down the street. Then I smell smoke, and I figured out that the fire trucks were coming to Town Hall. We had shortage, a lot of our electrical stuff, not good planning, but it's in a sunken basement area of the Town Hall, had shorted out and was starting to smoke and burn. That was kind of a low point. When here we are, we're in the middle of a flood, we're in the emergency operations center, trying to run everything, and it looks like the building might be on fire. It was like, well, what else can go wrong? So it was difficult that way. We also had issues when we had the the no flood zone hit one of our emergency evacuation centers. So we had to move that. But I think the town hall was pretty vulnerable. It was difficult to get to. And it was kind of in the center of things. But that's the only place we had the technology and the ability to do it. Great response from the fire department. We got things going. We got pumps in. We got things flushed out, got it back online. And it didn't really slow us down. But I do remember at one point when there was smoke starting to come up the hallway, the phones were ringing, and the fire trucks were coming to town hall. It's like, wow. You know, I was looking for the locusts to start flying in the window.
What strategies did you and other staff use to manage the loss of communication that we suffered during the flood?
Well, luckily, amazingly enough, the internet was the one thing that stayed up. So a lot of the communication we did was by email. And my communication with the state, because they were trying to coordinate assistance, they couldn't get a hold of us, was through email. That was probably the main thing. We did have some radio communication through our emergency radios, although we did have an outage on our tower for a while. We went to some very simple things like going door to door. The Boy Scouts came out. The Scouts are great. They're organized to help with things like that. They get trained in this. We use them to distribute flyers on the no flush zone. So we had them going door to door, giving out flyers. There's also a lot of times that people just don't hear those kind of things. We have some people that are very homebound, some elderly folks that didn't know what was going on, and it had to be more of a door-to-door type thing. A lot of mouth-to-mouth. Certainly the town hall meetings, getting the word out. We posted those in different places in town. We were having the town hall meetings for people who didn't have any communications or people were out of their homes, and posting things at the evacuation centers. You had to go back to some fairly simple ways to communicate. Some of us, actually, at my house, I have VoIP, the voice over internet for my phone, so I had phone. So I could call out and get to places other ways because it was over the internet. So we let other people in our neighborhood use our phone that had traditional phones or cell phones because we were the only way to get out of town. So we invited them in and let them use the phone in our house. We had a neighbor, it's one of those kind of aha moments. A neighbor across the street was in his 90s, and he knew his family was worried about him, but he couldn't call out and he couldn't get anywhere. And he came over and we were talking to him and said, well, the Red Cross has a notification system. You can probably go down here and register. And we were having this whole discussion about how he could get on the Red Cross contact list. And so his family would know he was okay until his phones could work. And then all of a sudden it just kind of hit us, said, well, you could come in our house and call him. And just one of those ones you don't think about. So he came in, he called on our phone, got a hold of him, told his family he was fine, and worked out well. But communication was tough. Communication is always tough in a disaster. Believe it or not, when the Scouts were going door to door, they even came to, I know of 2 houses they came to. People want to know, well, why don't the toilets work? They didn't know there was a flood. They were that isolated and that shut in their home that they didn't know there was flood, which is very scary. The good side is, though, I was around in '76 when they had the big Thompson flood, and there was, 140 people were killed. We didn't have the deaths we had the last time, and I think part of it is the technology and the communications. We didn't have reverse 911 then. We couldn't get back to people as quickly as we could. That was basically just door to door. We were able to get the word out quickly, not just us, but everybody, the state and the county, and got the word out to people to evacuate. I think a lot of things, too, had to do with the memories, even though it was a long time ago. The memories of '76 in the Long Lake flood were still there. And I heard a lot of stories in '76 where people were told to get out, and then they said, rains all the time. I'm not leaving. And those really were their last words. This time, I think, if you lived in the canyon and somebody said, there's a flood coming, get out, people grabbed their dogs, got in the car, and left. So I think there was a little more realistic thought that, okay, we're serious about this time. resulted, when you look at what happened along the Front Range, the biggest flood I've ever seen, and the number of deaths were very minor. Not that any death is minor, but there were very few. I think, what were there, 6 or 8, I think, along the whole Front Range, compared to over 140 in just the Big Thompson Canyon incident. Pretty amazing. You know, there were a lot of places too where the rescuers put themselves at risk, which was very frustrating. I know at least one home where they evacuated somebody. The lady went back, got back in her home to get something, got stuck again. They evacuated her a second time. She went back a third time. You know, you just should not be going back. It's so unfair because putting these rescuers at risk. Very difficult rescues. They could have been somewhere else. They could have been hurt. We had another very difficult rescue, terrible situation on Fish Creek, where a young woman jumped in the river to commit suicide during the flood, and the rescuers had to go in, and they risked their lives to pull them out. It's frustrating when you see something that is self-imposed like that, when there are people who are really in need, they appreciate the rescue, they get out of there and let people move on, but to have rescuers go in there and put their own lives at risk for something that was self-imposed or something somebody did to themselves, that was pretty frustrating and hard to take. Luckily, nobody was ever hurt in any of those, but that should not happen.
I want to talk a little bit more about the public briefings. Did you have any anticipation that they would be as largely attended as they were?
Maybe a little bit. You know, I'd been here then 2 years, and just by dumb luck, that was my third disaster that I dealt with. I'd only been here about 3 weeks when we had the Woodland Heights fire, and we learned from that. We did a few things there. We did some briefings for people, and then we regrouped after that. Then we had the Fern Lake fire that winter, and that's when we started doing these briefings this way, and we thought about putting them on the internet, and we had a lot of interest there as well. Certainly in some of the smaller, those weren't as big as the flood. People from out of town didn't hear things because it just didn't get that kind of attention. So we had some practice, as well as the training that many of us had. And you know, my previous job as the county manager for Larimer County had been through several floods and major fires. But I think we thought we would see that at the briefing, particularly when the communications was down, because there's just this hunger for information. People just want to know. They hate the vacuum, and that's where the fear and anger and frustration comes, when you don't know what's going on. So, no, it actually didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the out-of-town interest and the amount that the internet played in this. I think our town hall holds about 300, and we had standing room only, but we had 2,000 people watching us online all over the country. A lot of locals would just watch it on television because they didn't want to come down to the town, but that surprised me. And it worked really well, but we were getting questions from, as I said, El Paso, Los Angeles, Oklahoma City, calling and asking what was going on. That part was a surprise. Pleasant surprise. It worked really well.
What kind of interactions did you have with the business owners during the event? Were you in contact with a lot of them personally, or was it mainly through the briefings?
On a bulk, it was through the briefings and other things, but I did, you know, I tried to go down at least once a day, walk all the way down Elkhorn where they're affected, pop my head in, talk to a lot of them. You know, a lot of them didn't know me yet. I hadn't been there that long. Talk to as many as I could, see what was going on, answer their questions. Again, the one-on-one. A lot of them couldn't come to the briefings or didn't know what was going on because they're busy trying to save their stores. So, and then I got a lot of information to pass back on to the team that way as well. So it was more that type of one-on-one stuff. I really made an effort to get out of the way of the people who were doing their job every day. Again, pull on my irrigation boots and really walk from one end Elkhorn down to the other and just pop my head in and see how things were going and get a good feel for what was going on in town.
What was the feel that you got?
Well, it's what you expect. A lot of people were frustrated, scared. There was a lot of scare. They were scared about the future. What does this mean? Well, all the roads were gone. We didn't know how long the roads were going to be out. We didn't know if we were going to get food. September is a big month for them for sales. A lot of our businesses, most of particularly the guest-related businesses, depend on that summer season. And they were fearful if they were going to stay in business, if their livelihood was going to survive. We didn't know in the beginning when the roads would be open. We had just finished our budget. We completely threw that out and started over. We made the assumptions that the roads would be out through the next summer. And so we were slashing our budget, slashing programs, trying to see what we could do. And of course, the businesses were thinking the same thing. You fear the worst, that the roads would be out, no one would come the next summer in 14, no one would be here, they couldn't afford it, they'd go bankrupt. Just a lot of fear, particularly in those early days. A lot of fear of what was going to happen. And it took quite a while. The state was amazing. When they got the road opened up right before Thanksgiving, and then had the other run opened up before Christmas, I don't know how they did it, because I've seen the pictures. I don't know how they did it and got it fixed, but that probably did more to save us than anything else. I suppose one time when I really did feel like we were getting beat up on this was 3 weeks after the flood. There was a federal shutdown, and they closed the national park. And we were just getting to the point where we were getting people to come back up, even if it was just looky-loos to look at the flooding. We had our Autumn Gold celebration, I think it was. There's some others in there in October. October is a great time to be in the national park, and we were trying to get people to at least come up, get a little bit of business going, and then the national park closed. And between the flood and the closure of the national park, it really felt like we were getting kicked while we were down. It was like, my gosh, what else can you do to us to hurt us? That was probably the low point.
Could you talk a little bit more about working with outside organizations, the county, the state? How many different organizations do you think you worked with during the time?
Oh my gosh, there probably were literally over 100. The cooperation was great, and there's some really cool things that we did through the whole thing. One was since we were cut off, we needed a lot of gravel to fix the roads and to fill holes, but the first road open was Highway 7, and you had to go from the Denver metro area up to Central City, all the way down 7 to here. And to haul gravel that way, first of all, it's almost impossible to haul it that far, but it was extremely expensive. I think we were talking about $50 to $60 a yard, if you could get it here. And our public works director at the time, Scott Zern, had the idea of what if we made our own gravel? And it took some doing, but we were able to convince the Bureau of Reclamation to lower the level in Lake Estes, which that was one of the more difficult things to do, get them to do that. Then working with Grand County over on the other side of the Rockies, they sent us their rock crusher. They brought it over Trail Ridge Road. They didn't even know if it would go. It was the biggest thing ever to go over Trail Ridge Road. The thing was huge. They had to close the road, had an escort, and I'm surprised they made it around some of the corners. But they brought this rock crusher over. We brought it down here next to the lake. We excavated the gravel that had washed into the lake from the flood and reclaimed and made our own gravel at a cost of around $11 to $12 a yard. And it was a crusher from Grand County. It was operated by some employees from Pitkin County. Very amazing. The other thing we did, one of the more creative ones, was there's an area called the Retreat, which is farther down the canyon from Glenhaven. Was cut off completely and lost electricity. And we served them with electricity. And there was no way to get to them because the road was completely wiped out. And the guys had this just kind of harebrained idea of taking a helicopter, a big reel of wire, flying over the mountain and just reeling it out, basically draping it across the top of the trees, and then reconnecting the retreat and connecting it to Glenhaven to give them power. But it was over Forest Service, and we had to get that done. It also was the day before the government shutdown, and we had to get a permit. Those people of the Forest Service stayed, I think, until 9:30 at night to get our permit done, to get it issued, and get us permission to do that. Because at midnight, the government was shutting down and they couldn't work. They were ordered not to work. But they did that. They got it done. We got the permit in record time. They flew that, we call it the 5,000-foot extension cord over there, got it hooked up, and got power back to those people in their homes for their food, for eating, for people who were isolated. And that was another just amazing project cooperation. Building inspectors, we had 6 teams of 2 that came in from the western slope. They were there within 4 days. And within about 2 days, we had the initial triage of all the safety of businesses done. But they came from Montrose County and Pitkin County and other places on the west slope, because it was actually faster to get here from the west slope over Trail Ridge than for anybody from the metro area to come up. So there's just tons of stories of those kind of cooperations between agencies to help pull together. It's very inspiring.
What were some of your...
How am I doing on time? Am I okay?
Oh, good.
Okay.
It's 9:30 now.
Okay,
so, what were some concerns that you or other members of the staff had during the flood, as far as major structural issues or infrastructure issues? What were some of those things that were really you guys were kind of keeping an eye out for?
Well, certainly the roads. Fish Creek was the worst one, and we had a lot of people isolated. We were really concerned about people going out and getting around in some of these places because it was not safe. There were places on Fish Creek, and I'm still amazed nobody got hurt, because there were places on Fish Creek where the water had eroded all the soil out from underneath. And the only thing there was about 6 inches of asphalt cantilevered up over the river. I don't think it would have supported a golden retriever, let alone somebody driving across that. But if you look at it from one side, it looks like a road. If anybody would have driven on that, they would have immediately gone into the river and probably been, who knows. So that was pretty scary. The physical integrity of the Riverwalk, if that started to collapse, so a lot of the buildings would start collapsing as well. So we were very concerned about that. Keeping people out of the water, because there are a lot of places you couldn't see where things had been damaged, or holes that were there. There were utility boxes where the lids popped off and exposed utility vaults. Those were the things we tried to look at really quickly for just emergency safety. Bridges, would the bridges hold? You ask all those questions in the middle of this and you just don't know. I mean, you can't go out there and look at them as unsafe, and part of it is you just cross your fingers and hope everything's fine. The dam at Lily Lake, luckily that had just been repaired. If that had let loose on us, the damage would have been much worse. So we actually had somebody up there 24 hours a day just watching the dam. Not the most exciting job you could get. To even watching paint dry is more exciting than that, because at least something happens. But luckily it wasn't an exciting job, but we did have people up there just watching the dam, because if it started to go, we needed to evacuate a lot of people. So that was a little scary. Reminds me of when I was working at the county during the Long Lake flood, and at one point in the EOC at the county, we were worried about the integrity of Olympus Dam, because that flood was all at once, and there was some thought at some point if that hit that dam. And of course 82 was not that far from the wounds from 76 were still there. And I remember standing around and we're just crossing our fingers, hoping that dam will hold. And that's a terrible feeling, just waiting to see what's going to happen. It's a relief when it doesn't, but that's an anxious situation.
I think just personally for me, and I think for a lot of people, that was part of the anxiety of the flood as compared to fires. Is, the fires were kind of quick moving, and the fire department could stop them at certain points. But with the water rising, it was just wait and see how high it's going to get.
It was interesting too, because the first day was the Big Thompson, and the Big Thompson came up, it was flooding, and we dealt with that on Thursday. And then Friday, the storms must have shifted, and Fall River came up. They didn't flood at the same time. And they're so close, you think they would, but that was part of it, was when is it going to stop, and the amount of damage. And when I finally got up, at one point, the park took me up in a helicopter, and I started seeing some of the damage. And even now, when you go hiking in the backcountry, there are places where there's these huge ravines, and it's all washed out. And you think, I don't even remember there being a stream here, let alone a river that washed out. I said, where did this come from? So it was so extensive. And you're right, not knowing what's going to happen, that's always and that's why the information is so important. Not knowing whether it's information or not knowing what's going to happen causes more stress and fear than anything else.
Do you remember a specific moment or something that happened where you thought, okay, the water's going down, we're done with the worst of it, kind of a turning point?
It was pretty soon. I think one of the ones that hits me as really ironic is that right after, it was only a few days after the flood, and we're trying to clean up all the dirt in Elkhorn and all the silt. And I think I was at Kind Coffee meeting with somebody. I looked out, and here's a water truck, and we're pouring water on the street. And here we're recovering from a flood, but it dried up so much and was such this fine silt, we were having problems with dust and getting around. So I thought, wow, here we are recovering from a flood, and it's not mud. We're actually having to put water back on the road to keep the dust down. It was a little ironic, but I think probably each time they got a road opened up was another sigh of relief. Certainly once we didn't have to come over a trail ridge, but each time it opened up, first time we saw a gasoline tanker come into town or a Safeway food truck, those are the ones that started turning things around and saying, okay, we're going to get this done.
How long would you say it took before things kind of got back to 75, 80% of normal in the community after the flood?
That level, it was a lot faster than I thought it was going to be, but it probably was a good 6 months at least. And when we started having some good returns of people, but and here we are, year and a half later, and we're still spending a lot of time on flood work. We're still repairing things, so we're not back to normal yet. I probably should relate the story where I almost killed one of our senators. Of course, all the elected officials want to come and see this, and Senator Mark Udall was a senator at the time, came, and we're giving him a tour in the museum van, by the way. And we're driving them around, and I was driving, and Senator Udall was sitting next to me in the passenger seat. We had the mayor, we had his aide, his local staff person, Pam Shattuck. We had the superintendent of the national park, Diane Muno, who was the head of the Estes Valley Partners for Commerce. We're all in the van, and we're touring around the damage. And we went all around the area. We went up into the national park. We went over Deer Junction and came down to where the alluvium is. And I noticed the car, it was acting a little squirrely coming down the hill into Deer Ridge. When we went to Alluvial Fan, but I didn't think much of it. Came all the way back into town, and we were right down here at 34 and 36. Very busy intersection. I remember it really well because there were all these huge gravel trucks. This was several weeks afterward, coming through, bringing things in, these big semis. And we came up to it was a Saturday afternoon, and bringing them back to the museum, and we came up to the red light, and I pulled up, put down my foot to stop at the red light, and my foot went completely to the floor. Absolutely nothing happened. not even slowed down. And we were cruising right through the red light at this intersection. And the mayor was in the back seat. He said, "Frank, that's a red light." And I said, "I know, I have no brakes." And the senator's eyes got just huge. And, you know, thank God we just blew right through the intersection. Nobody was there. Ran the red light. I started pumping the brakes. So I think the master cylinder or something went out because I was able to get it back up. We were almost here. And Pam Shattuck said, "We can walk from here." But we pulled out in the museum, parked the van, and we didn't do anything else. So that Christmas, at the town Christmas party, and I'd already been given a hard time because I'd been here that long. We already had 2 fires and a flood. And they gave me a T-shirt that said Frank Disaster Lancaster. And on the back of it, it had 2 fires, and it had something representing a flood, and then it had a minivan as well. So they were, more than one person brought up the fact they hadn't had these problems till I got here. I promise I didn't cause any of them.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
You know, the resiliency of the community was amazing, and the way they came back and the way people handled it, and for the most part, the positive attitude and the support for their neighbors. I mean, it just showed what a special community this was. I don't think I've ever worked in an incident where the community rallied so much together, and you know, they just kind of bucked up and moved on ahead. You know, it was terrible. It was an awful thing to do, but they just rolled up their sleeves and pulled back, and the people are amazed. In fact, when we had some of the disaster relief people, we had to show them pictures to show them how bad it was because they didn't believe it, of how bad and how quickly we cleaned up. So I think that's the lesson coming from this. When a community pulls together, it's amazing what you can do, even in one of the worst disasters ever. It was a wonderful experience to go through. I hope I never do it again. But to have a chance to go through that and see how a community can pull together and how everybody worked together to as a group to come back was really amazing.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for your leadership specifically during the event, and thank you for your time today.
You bet. Thank you.